Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a brand new season of Civic Cocktail. I'm Joni Balter, and we are all about politics tonight, all about 3 statewide initiatives on the November ballot: guns, soda, and carbon, in that order. Journalists helping with the questions this evening: ESSEX Porter of KIRO TV and NATALIE Brand from King 5 Television. She is also keeping tabs on social media. First up, the gun safety measure, Initiative 1639, with Zach Silk, co-founder and board chair of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, speaking for Initiative 1639, and Dave Workman, senior editor of gunmag.com and Liberty Park Press. He opposes this measure. Zach Silk, we start with you. Can you give us the pro-1639 elevator pitch briefly? What would it do, and why do we need it?
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody, for having me, and to City Club and to the Civic Cocktail. It's a real honor to be here. So the most important thing to remember about 1639, it does 3 important things. We call it the Safer Schools, Safer Communities measure. It applies a much higher standard to the purchase and ownership of assault-style rifles. So those are semi-automatic rifles. That standard would include holding you to the same standard to purchase those as we do currently handguns. That means that it raises the age of purchase from 18 to 21, requires you to go through training, and it requires a much more rigorous background check, which is the second piece of the standard. Currently, when you purchase an assault rifle or a semi-automatic rifle, actually, you don't go through a very rigorous background check. It's a quick federal check. It's the same that's applied to other long guns, but that also means that it misses really important data points that might be applied if you had bought a handgun, for example. A handgun in Washington State, you check on a variety of other things that would be important if you wanted to know if somebody had a criminal record that the local police jurisdiction had, mental health records, and other data that local jurisdictions would have when you were trying to purchase. And the final thing that it does is it makes sure that folks safely store their guns. This is one of the most important ways for us to ensure safety in our community. Guns that are not safely stored fall into the wrong hands. They're easily accessed by children. Many of the tragedies we've had in our own community are because guns were accessed by parents that left their guns lying around. Also, we have a very big problem in this community of stolen weapons, and those stolen weapons find their way into criminal hands, and then they're used in criminal activities. So it's a comprehensive set of standards that we're trying to apply here. It absolutely has been a reaction to the lack of progress in the state legislature, and a reaction to what we see as gun crime and gun deaths, both here in Washington State and across the country. We really encourage you to vote yes. It's a responsible measure, and we believe it'll save lives.
Dave Workman, why wouldn't we, for example, want to raise the age of gun ownership to 21?
Well, because the firearms community looks at this, and there's a lot of 18 to 20-year-olds right now who do own those kind of firearms. They've been very responsible with them. They haven't committed any crimes. There's about 15 to 16 million semi-automatic modern sporting rifles, which people call assault weapons, in circulation right now. If there was a real problem with those guns, we'd certainly know about it. The initiative goes beyond just taking action against that kind of a firearm and includes just about every semi-automatic rifle that's ever been created by defining a semi-automatic assault weapon as just what a semi-automatic rifle does. 22 caliber, a target rifle, the guns that people hunt deer with. Beyond that, one of the main concerns that my readers have is the invasive nature of the application to buy a firearm. There's a provision in the initiative that requires the person to essentially open up their medical records to local police for examination. That's a problem with a lot of people who have told me that they think it's a HIPAA violation. And I think also the nature of the initiative itself, it covers 30 pages. There's a lot of stuff in there. And I've had it from several different people who are sincerely convinced that it violates the single subject rule for an initiative in Washington State.
We'll get to the legal part of that. Zach, Washington's measure, if it passes, would be one of the toughest gun safety measures in the country. Is Washington State sort of a testing ground for new gun rules?
Yeah, well, I think, listen, there's a couple of things that are going on with how we are approaching this. The most important thing is that we live in a community that wants to live at very high standards and do maximum protection of human life. And we are not trying to restrict gun ownership for those who are law-abiding and can pass a background check, can do the proper training, and to get access to these guns. So this is not a ban. There are many different ways to approach this kind of thing. We actually think we've done it very responsibly. We are designing new legislation and new approaches to be able to give maximum access to responsible gun owners. They go through these proper channels and these proper processes, they'll be able to get through to own these weapons. It is true, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is we want to try new things to keep our community safe while being compliant with the Second Amendment and allowing responsible gun owners to own guns. It is unique, it'll be a unique law, and we would hope that other states will be able to follow suit. We also think it's a way for us to get out of this binary, you're either for the Second Amendment or you're against the Second Amendment. This is just absolutely not true. We think we can live in a society where we have high standards for owning guns and that we can reduce deaths.
Dave, so aren't we in essence balancing this sort of well-respected tradition of young folks hunting against the new reality of some younger people shooting other people far too often?
Well, I think you have to separate the people who are shooting other people from the law-abiding young people. When I was in junior high school down in Tacoma, we had a rifle team. When I was in high school in Tacoma, we had a rifle team. Nobody suffered so much as a scratch. Most people who are gun owners are responsible gun owners. And I think that there is a misunderstanding that everybody who owns a firearm, the impression is that we're all a bunch of crazy people that don't take very good care of our guns. And that's not true at all. The problem with a lot of my readers is that they look at this initiative and they say, wait a minute, the government should not be mandating to me what I do in the privacy of my own home. If I store a firearm safely, that's my business. And how are they going to enforce that? You're going to have a police officer knock on your door and just come in and say, hey, I want to see your gun safe. There are problems with that.
I want to get to that, but first I want to ask you, Zach, about expanded background checks. Isn't this more of a broader category of guns that will be checked via state databases? Is that how it works?
Yeah, effectively. I mean, a little 101 on how to buy a gun in Washington State. You go into a dealership, and they're in Washington State. That means that they have a license to deal these weapons. You end up, if you end up buying a handgun, you go through a pretty rigorous process. We've decided in this state to hold handguns to a very high standard. It's part of the reason we do is because they're very deadly weapons, and they're designed to harm or kill people. And so because of that, we want to make sure you meet a high standard. This is about helping these other category of weapons fall under the same standard. Part of what you can imagine is that we not only want to find out about a federal background check, which is to say it checks against the federal databases if you're qualified, but we want to do a local check. That local check is much, much more comprehensive. It does check against what a local sheriff's office might know about you that may not be up into the federal system. It also makes sure that you don't have a protective order against you that would not otherwise be flagged by the federal system. And it is important, it's one of the incredibly important public safety standards we have, that these highly deadly weapons have gone through a much more rigorous check. We want to make sure that these assault rifles go through that same pattern as what happens with handguns.
Dave, a generation of children are afraid to go to school. What is wrong with more careful vetting of gun owners?
Well, maybe the problem with the media sensationalizing this stuff for one reason. Schools are actually pretty safe.
Media good.
Beg your pardon?
Media good.
Well, yeah, it's all our fault. And I think if you look around the country, you'll find that schools are pretty safe places. They are gun-free zones. These kind of things shouldn't happen there, but they have happened in gun-free zones, soft targets. Children shouldn't be afraid to go to school. I was never afraid to go to school, even when I was going to school with a rifle team down there. I was never afraid of that. I guess maybe what we've done is there's been a societal change. People don't understand firearms. People who live in the city, they don't have any experience with them. I didn't grow up that way. I grew up around firearms, and it never really occurred to me that somebody at some point in time would open fire on a schoolyard full of kids. But we deal with them, not penalize all the gun owners in the country.
Natalie Brand.
Still waiting for some audience questions on Twitter, but in the meantime, I have a follow-up question on the enhanced background checks. There's been some debate about how it's worked with your first initiative, 594. So is local law enforcement, state law enforcement, equipped to handle a greater workload now?
You know, it is an issue that we hope to deal with. We have tried to direct more resources to law enforcement by working with the legislature. There's also a provision in this that there'll be a fee that can be assessed so that there could be more money put into law enforcement so that they can make sure that this happens. And then we're always looking for ways to improve the data that is going in. I mean, really, these background checks at the end of the day are only as good as the data that goes into them. We want those systems to be able to talk to one another. We want it to be very easy to put to process these. So we're fully committed to that. We've been working with law enforcement agencies and the state legislature as we've gone on with the implementation of 594, and we'll do the same with this measure.
Audience, if you want to join, please do line up. Essex Porter, I know, has a question.
You know, listening to Zach, you were saying that a lot of the emphasis was on the weapons like the AK-47 assault-style weapon or the AR-15 assault-style weapon. Dave, for you, you were concerned about the other semi-automatic rifles that a lot of boys, a lot of kids grew up with, used for hunting. Would you be more comfortable with this if those type of weapons were not part of the initiative, even if the AR-15, AK-47 style were part of the initiative?
Well, unfortunately, Essex, the horses left the barn. They are covered in this initiative, and we're at a point right now where the language can't be changed. If this becomes law, if the voters approve of it, the definition that encompasses all of these guns is going to become part of state law. So,
but if voters reject this and Zach and his team would have another chance, would you be more supportive if they just focused on the AR-15, AK-47 style weapon?
well, it'd certainly be nice if they'd come over and sit down and talk to us about it. They didn't this time around. They didn't talk to us about 594 either. And, you know, 594 was, I guess, sold to the public as a way to prevent the kinds of things that happened in Mukilteo and at Cascade Mall up in Burlington, but they didn't. And that 594 was in effect when those two shootings took place. Didn't prevent either one of those guys from committing the crime.
Zach, do you want to answer that?
Here's the thing about the Mukilteo event, that the Mukilteo event is a good example of a loophole in our current system where a very distressed young man was able to walk into a store and buy an assault rifle, semi-automatic assault rifle, and within 24 hours go and kill several children, maim others, and it's because there was no comprehensive background check. He was under 21, and part of the reason that we are doing this is to prevent those tragedies going forward. 594 was designed to be able to catch people who are not qualified to own a gun and make sure that they couldn't go into the black market or the secondary market to buy a weapon. We've now closed that, which pushes people into the legitimate market, as this young man did. But we don't have the kind of system that would have prevented him from buying this gun. And this measure would have prevented him from buying that gun. And I can tell you that the father of one of the victims is the citizen sponsor of this initiative, and he believes deep in his soul that had this been law, it would have prevented that tragedy. It would have been a cooling off period, it would have prevented them from doing it, and had he actually bought a different type of weapon, he would have been able to fire many rounds as quickly as he could, completely untrained, and kill people. I just want to be very clear. These weapons are designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible. That is their pure purpose. There are a few guns that Dave is referencing that absolutely there are a few people that may use them for shooting purposes or sporting, but the vast majority of these weapons are simply designed to shoot as many rounds as quickly as possible, and they really are designed to kill. And that's why we feel like those should live at the highest possible standard for access, and that's what this would do.
Audience question. Hi, how you doing?
All right. This question is for Mr. Workman. Welcome to Seattle. If by some civic calamity I-1639 actually passes, what can we Americans do to resist, slow walk, or otherwise ignore it until we can repeal it in the legislature?
Well, I suspect that if it does pass, there's probably going to be a series of lawsuits challenging it on some of the grounds that I mentioned earlier. It may be a state lawsuit, maybe a federal lawsuit, maybe a combination of it depends on who files the lawsuit and what their grievance is.
What lawsuit are you anticipating? What lawsuit do you think is most likely?
Well, I think most likely it will probably be a state challenge to begin with.
About?
Excuse me?
About?
Well,
about two subjects or something?
Multiple subjects, and there might even be a 14th Amendment challenge at the federal level, because what you're doing is you're discriminating against a class of citizens that have achieved majority. 18, 19, and 20-year-olds can vote, they can join the military, they can enter into contracts, they can do all kinds of stuff. When they get into the military, we don't give them a semi-automatic rifle. We give them a full auto, and they're responsible for that. This argument that they're not responsible should be taken up with the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. So we'll see how that works out.
Social media question from
Do you have
Natalie.
a Twitter question for Dave? This audience member asked, what responsible gun owner will be negatively impacted by this proposal if law-abiding will get to obtain the weapons?
I think all of us will be impacted in some way by a law. Remember, we're talking about a piece of legislation that is designed to impact a protected constitutional right. And we need to understand that when your rights are...
If they pass the background check.
If they pass a background check, they ought to be able to own a firearm. But how many background checks do you need to go through? How much time do you have to wait before you can exercise a constitutionally protected right? We could have this conversation all evening long. Let's talk about a right that somebody else in here appreciates. How much are you willing to give up your right, your favorite right, in order to make somebody else feel good? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Can we focus a bit on safe storage? And
Sure.
Zach, for you, how is that going to be enforced? Are police going to be knocking on people's doors to check and see if weapons are properly stored?
No, I mean, we very carefully studied other states that have very similar state storage laws. We were curious about what other states did, how they approached it. And of all things, actually, one of the best model legislations on this is Florida, a Republican state, a Second Amendment state, and they have really strong, interesting storage laws. It's actually not based on a prescription about how you store your how you store your weapons, but it tells you that you can decide how to, and then you're responsible for what happens for them. This is a pretty basic standard, and really any responsible gun owner knows that they need to store their weapons safely, and we just believe that we ought to hold them to that standard, and that there will be consequences if they don't. And to be clear, we've already had this here. In Marysville, the young man that went to his high school and committed that atrocity had gotten easy access to his father's weapon because it was left out. And this happens quite often, very frequently. The other side of safe storage, of course, is suicide. And we know that this happens all too often, where there is an easy to access gun left out when someone's in distress and they get access to it. So our hope is that we provide a new standard in which people believe and understand that that there are consequences if these things get into dangerous hands. And no, there is no police force that will be enforcing this. This is about making sure that we set a standard of expectations of what you'll do, and then there'll be consequences if you've been derelict.
I'm glad you brought up the topic of suicide, because if it's true that no police officers are going to be knocking on people's doors, don't you believe there are some steps that could be taken to make storage, this awful thing that happens over and over again with unsafe storage, to protect, children and people who are contemplating suicide?
Well, I don't know. Somebody's going to have to define what they think safe storage is. I know a lot of people in Eastern Washington.
Attempts to do that. So,
well,
but you don't like that. What kind of safe storage do you think we could do?
Well, I don't know. For example, I've got some firearms stored in a locked cabinet. I've got some firearms stored in a locked safe or 2 or 3 locked safes. I know people in Eastern Washington who think that when they lock the door of their home and their rifle is down, say on a rifle rack or cased unloaded in a closet, that's safe storage, because who's going to belong in their house? People who break into your house don't belong there. That's, to them, safe storage. And we're talking about a cultural thing here too. And frankly, I was over in Eastern Washington the other day, and we're not very popular over there. The Seattle people just, the idea of this initiative is not terribly popular anywhere east of the summit. And I think the people who advocate a thing like this, they've got to understand that there's a different culture over there, and a different culture among firearms owners, people who've grown up with them, that they don't think and worry about guns like some folks here do.
The reality is, I just want to be really clear, many people who are involved in this are firearms owners and grew up in gun culture, including me. I grew up in rural America. I grew up around guns. I was very happy to shoot guns. I'm pretty sure, although I can't totally confirm it, that I took an NRA marksmanship course when I was young, and I took my hunter safety classes. Actually, one of the reasons I do this work is because the gun culture that I grew up in, which was a culture of responsibility, was an incredible culture where I felt proud to be a gun owner and to be somebody who used firearms, is no longer reflected in the culture we have today. And we are trying to set standards for everyone for us to live up to. And I think gun owners will be proud of those standards. They live by them every day. But the problem is, of course, we have a culture today in which they're easily accessible by people that do not follow these really norms of behavior inside the gun community. And when you don't have that, you set up laws that set high standards for people. And that's what we're doing.
Without getting too gun wonky here, can you talk a little bit about what counts as a semi-automatic assault rifle and why that's one of your concerns?
Well, there's no such thing as a semi-automatic assault rifle. They don't exist. They've never existed. An assault rifle is a selective fire weapon designed for the military. You can either fire single shots out of it or multiple shots with one squeeze of the trigger. What we've got out there in circulation now is a civilian version of the old AR-15 as it's come up through the years and been developed. It operates just like Grandpa's old A5 shotgun. One squeeze of the trigger, one round out of the gun. It's not an assault rifle. In fact, the military won't use them because they are only a semi-automatic rifle. What I think disturbs a lot of the people in the gun community, people I talk to almost every day and write for, is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, the definition of an assault rifle in this initiative encompasses every semi-automatic rifle that's ever been made. A .22 rifle, the Ruger 10/22, most popular .22 rifle in the country. The Marlin Model 60, the old Winchesters, the Browning SA-22 that you see them all the time at county fairs, at shooting galleries. Those guns now become suddenly assault rifles under the definition that's in this initiative, and that's really going too far.
All right, thank you. We have been talking with Zach Silk and Dave Workman about Initiative 1639, the gun safety measure. Hang on to your seats. We're coming right back to talk about sweetened beverage taxes. Thank you.